Hi, everyone. We're going to get started very soon. This is Carolyn DeWitt, President and ED of Rock the Vote. Excited to join you. Let us know in the comments where you are joining us from and if you voted, how you voted, whether it was in person on Election Day, early, or by mail. Also, if you have made sure to confirm that you're counted, you can do that at rockthevote.org. Make sure that you're resolving any issues if you did vote provisionally. And now we have our special guest today, Kristin Clark. Hi, Kristen.
Hey, good to see you.
Hey, good to see you. Aside from being sleep deprived, how are you doing? I have my coffee, so feel free to drink your coffee if you got it.
I have an alternative source of caffeine here.
Got it. Nice. Well, I just want to welcome you and let our guests know. So, Kristin Clark is the president or CEO of Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law. Kristen, can you give us just a brief background about the organization, also election protection that you all run?
Yeah, well, it's great to see you, and it's been good fighting with you all year, and we survived. We've made it this far. So the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law is a national civil rights organization. We work on many racial justice issues, criminal justice, fair housing, equal educational opportunity, but work to safeguard voting rights is one of the core things that we do. And we run Election Protection, which is the nation's largest nonpartisan voter protection program. It includes a massive coalition of amazing organizations like Rock the Vote. So thank you, Carolyn, for all that you do. And we've got this hotline, 866 Our Vote, that's been humming all year long as we've been helping voters figure out how to vote amid the pandemic. And the phones are still ringing, right? Because this election isn't over. And I know we'll get into kind of the issues that people need to be thinking about in this home stretch, but election protection, 866 Our Vote, thousands of trained lawyers who've been working all year long to help voters figure out how they can have voice in this challenging and historic election season that we've been in.
Yeah, so to break that down for everyone watching, basically anytime you saw the 866 call, or 866 Our Vote anywhere, that's you and your team running that program and that entire, that program of volunteer lawyers. And actually, it's kind of interesting, I think, to think one of the things you mentioned on one of the coalition calls with the principals from the organization, sort of what that even looks like and how it's run different this year because of COVID and because of distancing versus years past. Do you want to talk about that? That would be interesting to hear.
Yeah, I mean, this pandemic has upended our lives, and it's the biggest thing that we do, running election protection in a presidential year. And so normally we've got like 4,000 to 5,000 trained lawyers who support the program across the country. We ended up increasing that to 42,000 lawyers who we had to train, and we had to do it all remotely. And on election day, that meant figuring out how we build these kind of remote call centers that were fielding traffic from people in different parts of the country on a local basis. But then we had a number of us in the office in what I call the mothership on election day. And the room was quiet. It was like the tech piece, just making sure that all of the remote pieces held together on election day. We got about 30,000 calls on the hotline on election day, which isn't high, but that's because we were dealing with high traffic all year long with people who really did vote by mail. It's remarkable. I mean, this is a season where the most intense moment was October. People, who were calling and trying to figure out deadlines for vote by mail, trying to deal with absentee ballot notary requirements and witness requirements and U.S. Postal Service delay issues. So October ended up being our most intense month of the year.
Yeah. It's really becoming election season and not election day anymore. And that's actually a great thing because it allows flexibility for voters.
Yeah, I kind of think some of these changes are with us to stay. I kind of feel like a lot of people learned about vote by mail for the first time, and will likely, use vote by mail a lot going forward.
Yeah. So what were, you briefly talked on some of the issues, some of the calls people had specifically in like October around vote by mail. What were some of the other calls that election protection were receiving for in-person voting and even on election day and maybe even still happening?
Intimidation. And I was very worried about what we might see on election day, given what an explosive year it's been. But fortunately, a lot of these, efforts that we heard about, I remember Donald Trump Jr., kind of promoting, we're going to be recruiting 50,000 able-bodied men and women to go out and watch on election day. I think it ended up being a lot of hot air, a lot of talk. But we did get complaints about individuals who did show up at some polling sites and were questioning and badgering people as they were going in. A truck near the entrance of a polling site in Florida trying to obstruct voters. The great thing is, I think this election season, people are just worn out, but so determined. And there were very few people who said, I did not vote because of what I saw, but I wanted to make sure I reported it so that people knew that there are these folks out here trying to harass people and trying to scare people away from voting.
Yeah.
But, right, with the pandemic and everything that people had to endure, I think people were not deterred in the end.
Mm-hmm. I like this. We have a comment. I think the promoting of potential voter intimidation also helped drive early and absentee voting. I think that's probably very true.
Yeah, people just not wanting to risk having to deal with any nonsense on election day. Mischief is what I call it. Just nuisance. It's such a nuisance. I mean, to think that in states that have open carry, that people would think a polling site is a good place to go to display and showcase your Second Amendment rights. It's just such nuisance level activity, frankly.
Yeah.
Like, where are you going to go next? A schoolyard, a playground? I mean, just let people vote. Let people vote.
Yep. On that note, actually, in terms of intimidation, kind of what we're seeing now, people are done voting in person. People have mailed in their ballots, and several states, I think it's something like 20 states still are allowing ballots to be delivered so long as they were postmarked sometime and that sort of thing. There have been a couple things I think people have seen on Facebook or on Twitter where now counters and election administrators are being intimidated. What's your take on that, and what can be done about it, or what is being done about it?
It's very frustrating, and our organizations are nonpartisan, but it's hard not to talk about President Trump and the statements and the rhetoric and the way that it can inflame the public and arouse the public and incite the public. So this morning he tweeted in all caps, stop the vote. And there are many people who will, see that as a charge and heed his words and do whatever they think is necessary to stop the vote. We're really concerned because these efforts are popping up in places with large numbers of voters of color, Detroit, Phoenix. We need law enforcement to step up and do more and to pull people away who have no authority to be at these at these counting centers. And I feel for the poll workers who are experiencing intimidation right now. We've heard that some of them are feeling frightened and intimidated. They are the heroes of this election season. I mean, they did a heck of a job on election day, carrying out voting during long hours amid a pandemic, and now have this massive task of having to go through mail ballots because of a pandemic. And we need to just step back, trust the process as we always do, and let them do their job and count every ballot.
Yeah. We had Amber McReynolds on yesterday talking about the process, and actually Tiana Epps Johnson from ECL talking about, again, the process, because this is a huge logistical process to count all the ballots. I don't think people really realize it. It's not just counting them, but it's the processing and, you know, verifying the answers or the identity, physically opening, thinking about the millions of envelopes that have to be opened, and then counting them, and how some states weren't even allowed to start doing that until actually today.
Right.
Yeah.
And President Trump, in some instances, fought so that states could not begin counting mail ballots until Election Day.
Mm-hmm.
So we're in this position in part because he fought so that the rules would be such that officials couldn't open those ballots until Election Day itself. So we just got it. We went into Election Day, you and I, we knew that, right, part of our message was that patience, we were going to need patience this season, right? It's an election season like none other, and we just need to wait as the officials do their job and get through those ballots. They've been working long hours, but I trust that they're going to get there. And I trust that the outcome will be one that we can all live with if we just step back and let the process be a fair and neutral one, and one where the officials are doing their job. And they're doing it in a transparent way. It's kind of neat. I was watching the video feed, I think from Atlanta, maybe.
Okay.
You know, it's incredibly transparent, right? Like you could literally tune in and watch what they're doing.
Yeah, like a ballot cam.
Yeah. Right.
Okay, so now I'm thinking, you know, we're kind of going into this phase of processing and counting is starting to be reported at the initial counts that we have, right? In several of the states. We have a few more states where counting and processing still needs to happen. We have a lot of ballots still to be received through the mail, but obviously we're also seeing legal challenges now starting to happen. Can you shed some light for folks on what are some of the legal challenges happening, and also what that timeline looks like too, because states do have times where they have to certify and have to kind of resolve legal challenges, and if you can talk about that a little bit, that'd be great.
So there are some suits that have popped up in Pennsylvania, I believe one in Nevada. I don't think these cases are going to be successful. I think that they are after the fact attempts to disenfranchise voters, and that judges should see these suits for what they are, you know, just clear attempts to hijack the process. But we may have to wait for recounts, right, which are triggered in some states if the vote margin is less than 1%. And historically, recounts have very rarely resulted in dramatic changes in result outcomes. But I think that that's likely what's going to slow things down, the recounts, and not the legal challenges. To me, the worst possible outcome is one of these cases does kind of make its way through the courts and lands at the Supreme Court steps. We don't need courts deciding this election. Too many of us, right, a historic number, what is it, 150 million Americans have gone out and overcome tremendous obstacles to vote during a pandemic. Voters should decide the outcome of this election, and not 9 people working remotely on the Supreme Court.
Yeah, that really would be in I think a lot of people's experts like one of the most just like divisive results of this election could be it going to the Supreme Court.
Yeah.
In terms of I guess one thing I should say, if anyone's watching and you have questions, please feel free to drop them in. In terms of, you know, what voters should be looking for now, and we're going to have some education on what the recount process looks like and how it's triggered by how it's handled in different states. But what should voters kind of be on the lookout for now, or is there something that they can do that you would suggest?
Yes. So I think there's incredibly important time-sensitive work, and I know that you at Rock the Vote are focused on this too. But we need to reach all of the voters who cast provisional or paper ballots on Tuesday. because in some instances, those folks very easily can take a step or two to make sure that their ballot counts. People who registered for the first time and maybe showed up without ID, right, may have been denied the opportunity to cast the regular ballot. They cast a provisional ballot, and there's actually a step that they have to take now to make sure their ballot counts. There are some people who voted by mail who may have gotten a notice back saying there was something wrong with the ballot, please get back to us. And in some instances, it may have been very small, arcane things like you put 2 digits of your birth year, we asked for 4. Signature match verification is a pain, but sometimes officials will claim we looked at the signature you provided on your ballot looks different. And we fought back against some of those rules. Election officials are not trained to do signature matching, but those rules do hold up in some states. So if you got a notice about an issue with your mail ballot, or if you cast a provisional ballot, it's really critical that you take steps now to ensure that your voice will count. And, we're seeing that in every election, not just presidential elections, but in so many elections, the margin is razor thin and can come down to just, a couple hundred, a couple thousand votes. So for those who are watching, I hope that you will spread the word that we need people to take action now to make sure that if you cast a provisional ballot or had an issue with your mail ballot, that you take steps to fix those issues now. And we are working 7 days a week at 866 our vote, 866 our vote, so people can call us and we can walk them through the process and the steps that they need to take.
Yeah, I was gonna say, and in some places, that's actually good for everyone now. Even if you didn't get a notification, because sometimes some counties, they do require that, but in some cases, do they actually require, if there's an issue with your ballot, for them to notify you? Is that a requirement?
So you're saying, could there have been an issue and maybe you won't get notice? Yeah, because we filed a lot of litigation to fix these issues, but we didn't reach all 50 states. So sadly, yes, there's some places where there may have been an issue with your ballot and they may not have notified you.
Yeah.
So it would be a good idea to just call and say, did you receive my ballot? Is everything good? Call an official and do that. Issue those are the people who cast provisional ballots, or the people who did get actual notice.
Yeah, we actually, I have not gotten this out to the Election Protection Coalition, but we stood up a tool at rockthevote.org. Allows people to put in their information. It gives them where they can track their ballot to make sure that was received and confirmed, and their local election contact information, website, email, phone number, all of that stuff, so they can actually proactively call, resolve those eligibility questions if they cast a provisional ballot, or resolve those issues if it's showing that there is an issue with their other ballot. Because sometimes the notifications come through the mail and it's like, I don't check my mail every day.
Yeah. So I actually tried your site out yesterday.
Oh, okay.
And I actually used it last night to make sure that my ballot counted. So it's a great tool. And I encourage people to use it. And thank you for putting the hotline number there, because some people may go through the process and find out my ballot didn't count, or it's in process. And people can call the hotline to get that extra help. But it's a great tool, and we're going to be promoting it as well.
Oh, great. Excellent. Yeah. Fantastic. Okay. Any questions in the chat? And anything, Kristen, I think once we kind of get out of this, like obviously right now voters should be making sure their vote counted, reaching out to their friends and family, making sure they're doing the same, and letting the process work through, obviously paying attention to where things are at, and at any step kind of there will be different actions that voters can potentially take to make sure that this continues through as we think about the future. And what we need to do to fix our democracy so it works better for the people, particularly increasing participation and not making it so voters have to jump through all sorts of hoops and face challenges voting. What are the things that we need to think about doing and fixing right away?
Yeah, this pandemic, I think, has just made clear how fractured our election system is. If you lived in Texas, it was really hard to vote this season. You had to endure really long lines. You had to deal with officials who chose to restrict access to vote by mail to certain categories of people. You had to deal with one drop box to return your ballot.
Yeah.
But then if you lived in California, you could just stay at home and you didn't even have to apply for the absentee ballot. The ballot just came to you. So I think that we've got to figure out how we can make our election landscape a little bit more even. It shouldn't be the case that where you live determines how high the obstacles are that you've got to overcome to vote. And we just need reforms. We need to just open up access to vote by mail, have things like same-day voter registration opportunities on election day. We need lots of polling sites so people do not have to contend with lines. Officials just so got it wrong in terms of calculating the number of polling sites that people would need. Those lines in New York City, for example, my goodness. So we've got a lot of work to do once we catch our breath from 2021. But I think the most important thing that people can do right now is to just speak up, talk about the importance of counting every vote, count every vote, count the ballots. Voting is over. You know, Trump says, stop the vote. Voting is over. But what's happening right now is really critical. Count the votes, count the ballots, and we need to lift that message up very clearly to silence a lot of the noise that's out there right now. We're going to get to the finish line. We just need some patience to get there.
Yeah.
Clarity.
Right. I was going to say, and one of the things there is something that came up on the comment section. So continue to ask questions. One of the things that I think is going to be important for us, that one of the challenges in particular this year and even in 2016 was the fact that we don't have the full protections of the Voting Rights Act right now and what that means. You know, there is obviously the John Lewis Act in the Senate right now, but if you can kind of talk about even some of the, you know, there's obviously the state policies we need to push for, but the Voting Rights Act and how important it is to not just restore, but expand it.
Yeah. So there is no federal civil rights law more important than the Voting Rights Act. And it was just decimated by the Supreme Court in 2013. It cut out this core provision that applied to states, all the voter suppression states that we talk about. When we talk about voter suppression, you Google it and you will see Georgia and Texas and North Carolina and Florida, because these are the states that had to get federal review of new voting laws before they could be put into place. And without that review process, it's just been open season in so many of these states. They've shut down polling sites relentlessly. They have put in new rules to, for registering people to vote. They've gotten away with things like capping the number of drop boxes in communities, regardless of the size and population of the areas. And if we had the full protections of the Voting Rights Act in place, I don't think we would be experiencing voter suppression at the intense level that we are right now. So if we can, in 2021, I'm hoping that this can be a number one agenda item, restoring the Voting Rights Act, and putting the heart of the Voting Rights Act back in place, and carrying forth John Lewis's legacy, right? Like one of his last acts as a member of Congress was presiding over the House vote for the Voting Rights Advancement Act. And so we've got to carry his torch forward and get that bill to the finish line in the Senate. We need Mitch McConnell, if he's still there, and I presume he will be, to move that legislation forward in the Senate.
Mm-hmm. The way I think a lot of us who work in this space, what the Voting Rights Act did and how important it was and what the Supreme Court decision really did. But the way I kind of describe it sometimes is it obviously did a lot of things, and it still is very useful to us. But, you know, it first, the way I think about it is, number one, it, it outlawed basically discrimination based on race or ethnicity. Then it said some of you jurisdictions were bad actors. You know, you did X, Y, and Z. You have a history of discrimination. And because of that, then the third thing it said is, if you've been deemed a bad actor, you have to basically go ask permission.
Yeah.
Sorry there, we're getting calls in. If you've been deemed a bad actor, you can't be trusted to change things about your voting law, because you've shown your true colors in the past that given any chance, you will pass something that's discriminatory. And so therefore, you're a bad actor. You have to go ask the Department of Justice before you change anything, right? And that pre-clearance, that's the component that was really important, because it made sure that anything that was changing, or at least anything under certain categories, we would be notified and it would be evaluated. Does that sound like
you explain it beautifully? Yeah. And
well, we have to break it down so people understand it.
Yeah. It's like a checkpoint on democracy too. It's kind of like, before you can move forward with this new thing that you want to do, we actually just want to review it and make sure that it is something that will not prove harmful to voters of color, to Black voters, Latino voters, and other voters of color who face discrimination. I'll give you like one or two quick examples.
Yeah.
Georgia has just been a hotbed of voter suppression, and Georgia was a place where officials at the local, at the state level, county level, they all had to get voting changes reviewed before they could be put into effect. And there's this place, Macon-Bibb County, Georgia, where they sought to move a polling site from a majority Black school to the local sheriff's office. And that's a decision that changes voting that would have had to have been given to the Justice Department for review. If it went through that review process, it would have been blocked, because this tactic of moving polling sites to locations deemed hostile by voters of color is a tactic we've seen throughout history. And here we are in the modern day, still seeing these, voter suppression attempts. We were able to work with the community and fight, and we ultimately had that site moved to a majority Black church. But we're in this world now where we constantly have to file cases and litigation to beat back the voter suppression, and it can take years. And that review process was kind of like a quick preemptive strike that blocked the voter suppression right at the outset. It's been a devastating blow to democracy, and it's one of the reasons why we talk so much about voter suppression, because it's become, sadly, such a part of our reality because the Voting Rights Act has been weakened.
Yeah, and the weakening, I mean, the Supreme Court decision in 2013, which, like, for young voters, yes, it's a good amount of your life, but for those of us who've been working in this, it's not that long ago. Like, this is the second presidential election without the full protections of the Voting Rights Act. And it's not that the whole VRA, as we like to call it, the short acronym, is deemed unconstitutional or anything. It's basically this, correct me if I'm wrong, but the Supreme Court basically said, yes, there's discrimination and it exists. Yes, there should still be pre-clearance, right? Or that asking of the Department of Justice. But what jurisdictions, that formula for determining who a bad actor is, what jurisdiction is a bad actor, needs to be updated. And that's basically, they left it up to Congress, and Congress hasn't done it for 7 years.
7 years.
Yeah.
7 years, Congressman Lewis waited and fought and waited and fought, and nothing. So this should definitely be one of our biggest priorities in 2021, getting that bill to the finish line.
Yeah. And then in terms of another thing that kind of came up was on one of the questions was actually the electoral college is a whole, I feel like that's a whole another conversation. Happy to have your feelings on it, but it did bring up something for me for us to think of 21, which is redistricting, and how much we're going to have to pay to that next year.
Yeah, yeah. And redistricting matters because we're not just talking about congressional seats, we're also talking about city councils and school boards, county commissions, and power at the local level, at the most profound level, where it truly impacts our day-to-day lives. And every 10 years, elected officials have to redraw the boundaries on these maps so that we're complying with one person, one vote. There are huge population shifts throughout a decade. We're going to get census data that hopefully is in reliable form. And then we're going to use census data to redraw the districting maps for governing bodies at every level of government. And I'm hopeful that people, all of this energy that we've seen in 2020 around this election, that we can harness that energy around redistricting, because that's incredibly important work. And the big threats there are partisan gerrymandering and racial gerrymandering. And with technology these days, it's just so easy for lawmakers to redraw maps in ways that will produce the precise outcomes that they want, that will guarantee that incumbents can win, that will guarantee that particular parties can control the system. And we want the people to have more of a say in that process. And that's going to mean showing up at the meetings and using our voices and pushing back when we see officials gerrymandering maps in ways that can reduce our political power and silence our voices.
Yeah. So I am paying attention to the time. I could keep talking to you, quite honestly. I've really enjoyed this. I do, for those of you who still had questions, I know there are more questions about college and other issues. We are continuing to keep these IG Lives going, so please pay attention. We right now are running them at 12, 3, and 8 p.m. Eastern time. And we will start them back up again on Monday. So we'll keep them going just to educate on different issues, whether it's electoral college, voting, the recount process, all of that. Kristen, thank you so much. Is there anything else you want to mention before we jump off? And sorry for making you late to your next meeting.
No, we've got the 866 our vote number going 9 to 9 Eastern. 866-687-8683. And the last thing that I would just say is it's so great to be in the trenches with you, Carolyn. And thanks for your leadership and the great work that you do at Rock the Vote. I know that you guys have done phenomenal work this year, especially in turning out new voters and young voters and students. So I'm just thankful for you and looking forward to continuing to fight with you in the new year.
You're making me a little teary, but the same goes to you. I think once it is safe enough, we all need to get together and toast to each other. So thank you very much.
Virtual high five.
There we go. All right. Thanks, Kristen.
Take care.
You too. Bye-bye.